that was given to them? Why are bankers privileged and not told when you face the end of your time, you need to reskill? We were happy doing it with Scargill. You mentioned Scargill and the miners earlier. We told the miners the days of coal mining is over. You've got to go and learn new trades and new jobs. If you look at the bailout for the first company that told us that something was going to be going wrong with the first bailout was the Building Society, if we remember, which converted to a bank. And that was, I think, was it August 2007 that the first rounds of cash went in. In total, the government is on the hook now for 60 billion there. If you consider that there are 8,000 employees in that institution, we have spent £6.5 million per job. What was wrong with just letting it fold? 6,500 jobs. Where did the money go? Well, of course, they owed a lot of money out. So they paid off all the people that they owed. But sadly, people that owed them money, like Bear Stearns and Lehrmans, went bust. So they didn't get money that was due into them. So they borrowed from the taxpayer, paid off their creditors internationally. The money left the UK. That's the double whammy to this. So it's not even circulating in our economy anymore. It left the UK, and now it can't ever be repaid. These things are just all artificial. I mean, they're all dead. They're all on life support machines. If these are people on life support machines that needed switching off a long time ago, the costs involved are absolutely enormous. And that brings us to the moral issue, the rise and fall of civilization, which is the title. We've lost integrity like nobody's business. We used to use that term, right honourable, for members of the houses here, because that's what they were. When we suspected a scandal, they were honourable enough to resign and not tough it out. Now they've all been caught, 50% of them committing criminal acts with their expenses. And all of them have apologised for bad accounting. And you're in charge of our economy and you don't understand your own personal expenses? How dare you not stand down for that alone? How dare you not understand your own personal expenses, and we trust you with the nation's finances? Have the integrity and honour to walk and make room for people who do actually care, do want to make a difference, because this room is full of people who do. We don't need to line our own pockets from it. We actually want to do it because of the common good, because values actually outside of fiscal values are important. You can't manage money without integrity. You simply cannot. And the issue of regulation, where we had right honourable, when we have to regulate politicians, what we're actually having to do is now pay for external policemen because people have lost their own internal policemen. One of the things, people often mock people of faith, but you know, one interesting thing about the belief of the concept of a sin, which I believe in, and you know, other people here today here do, is that it actually prevents you from doing something. On the whole, okay, there's those amongst us who are weak, but it gives us a moral hazard. Remove the moral hazard, and the only downside is getting caught. The only danger is getting caught. Not I'm going to be answerable to a higher power, not this internal policeman reminding me that it's against my belief system as a Buddhist that I shouldn't be doing this, it's going to send out bad karma that's going to come back to me. There is this idea of an internal policeman which we've lost, and that's forcing us to pay for external policing to the extent now that we've got our own politicians who have been caught in the most shameful way, and the way in which they lie to us. They tell us austerity measures. Let's just look at this lie. To be austere is a self-discipline. If you enforce austerity on somebody else, that's what we call poverty. These are not austerity measures, they're poverty measures being enforced by the government. If you choose to be austere, That's fine, that's self-discipline. That's a righteous thing to do. But poverty isn't a righteous thing to do. Most people on the receiving end of poverty on this planet actually would rather be somewhere else. And this now brings us back to the issue of telling the truth. Gordon Brown wanted to leave, a bit like Bush did, on everything was fine when I left. We've had an audit done by the ACCA into the reality of the debt obligations of our government, i.e. us the taxpayer, because it's not the government's debt, it's the government have done that on our behalf, it's our debt. For a long time we've been led to believe that the GDP to debt ratio, which is the wrong ratio, I'll come to that in a second, was about 1 to 1 for this country, and then we could kick Greece in the shin for going 7 or 8 to 1 and being completely over the top, and everywhere else in the world. The ACCA, the Association of Certified Chartered Accountants, has said that the actual total amount of liabilities, including public-private partnerships and everything else which is owed, is actually £5 trillion. It's not 1 trillion in direct borrowing through the gilt market. The other types of contingent liabilities on the balance sheet add up to 5 trillion, which gives us a government revenue, because we should never compare GDP to debt. Well, that's a great lie. You lie this one, Peter. That makes us think that the GDP belongs to the government. No, it doesn't. The GDP is our production. It belongs to us, the people. Government has got permission to tax us on the profit out of that GDP, and their revenue that they are legitimately allowed to compare their own finances to is the debt to their own revenue. It's rather like me turning around and applying for a bank loan. To clarify, I go to the bank to buy a house, and they say, well, you know, your salary is £30,000 a year, we can lend you 100. I say, well, no, you can lend me 650,000 because GDP is XYZ. So GDP doesn't belong to you. It's not your GDP. It's the nation's wealth. So the government quotes GDP. Why? Because it's a much bigger number than their tax revenue, and the ratios look much, much smaller. If we actually go revenue to debt, this government has got us on 7 to 1 now. The same rate as Greece. This means that our debt is already, and you will have heard the Chinese rating agency has knocked us off the AAA. We're already AA in the world's eyes. In reality, we're probably BBB. We're just about borderline investment grade for sovereign debt. The implications of that, when we're looking at this double leg, and this is kind of closing, is that when our country goes out to borrow money at the debt auctions, we're going to have the same phenomenon which has occurred in the United States this year, which is that the first 3 auctions had no alternatives to put it in, which they consider to be safer. Let's look at that word, safer, the flight to quality, safer than US debt. Why? Because the US debt ratios are actually about 16 to 1 to government revenue, because they've got $16 trillion sat there, and their annual revenue is about $1.5 trillion from taxation. So certainly more than 10 to 1, and that doesn't include the off-balance sheet liabilities. That's naked debt. When you get off on the off-balance sheet stuff, you're going to be going
66 trillion, I think.
Huge. Well, I mean, what financial institutions have been allowed to do is absolutely incredible, frankly. The levels of ratio, fractional reserve doesn't exist. It all got changed in the new Capital Accord, and many people still use the term fractional reserve. It exists in theory, but in a very, very different manifestation. The principle is the same, debt-based, interest-based debt, but the methodologies are non-linear mathematics. It's all very sophisticated and difficult to calculate. But those ratios of 10 to 1, if we look at JP Morgan, the highest leveraged bank in the United States, they managed to get on their derivative book to capital a ratio of 2,000 to 1. They had, against a capital holding of $46 billion, credit derivatives worth 90 trillion. That's just one institution.
Just remained on this was 88 trillion, 66 trillion, 38 trillion, blah blah. That's what
Well, exactly.